50 Cent sees the opening. Rick Ross thought he was walking into another album cycle. Instead, he may have handed 50 Cent the exact opening he had been waiting for. The moment Set in Stone hit the conversation and reports about its early sales and streaming performance began spreading online. This stopped being only about music. For 50 Cent, those numbers became ammunition. And if there is one thing hip-hop has learned about Curtis Jackson, it is that he rarely wastes good ammunition. Ross had spent weeks keeping his name active, talking about the album, defending his position in the culture, and throwing fresh shots at longtime rivals. But 50 did not need a new diss record or some complicated response. He simply focused on the scoreboard. People were already arguing about. Social media posts began mocking Ross's chart performance, and suddenly every stream, every reported unit, and every comparison became part of a rivalry that has survived for years. That is what made this round different. Ross was trying to frame Set in Stone as a long-term play, something made for real hip-hop listeners rather than a quick first-week victory. But 50 was framing the exact same situation in the opposite direction. If Ross was still one of the biggest bosses in rap, why weren't the numbers matching the image? And that question hit harder because this was never just about an album. These two men have spent years comparing money, ownership, business moves, influence, and legacy. So when 50 saw people debating Ross's latest performance, he appeared to recognize something bigger than a sales story. He saw another chance to control the conversation. Ross, however, was never going to sit quietly while somebody else defined his career. He began pushing back with talk about longevity, genuine listeners, streaming, ownership, and what he described as playing the long game. In his world, 1 week could never erase 2 decades of success. But 50 Cent had already found the pressure point, because once the internet starts asking whether a veteran superstar is losing momentum, defending yourself can sometimes make the story even louder. And Ross was about to discover that every explanation could give 50 another angle to attack. So who has the advantage right now? If you think 50 Cent saw the perfect opening, come on. If you believe Rick Ross is being judged way too quickly, come on dude, and tell us where you're watching from tonight. Subscribe to the channel, because this rivalry is about to move far beyond album sales. Ross refuses to call it a flop. Rick Ross was never going to let somebody else decide what his numbers meant. While 50 Cent and social media critics focused on the reported first-week performance of Set in Stone, Ross immediately tried to change the frame. To him, judging the entire project from one opening week ignored the bigger picture. His argument was simple. He was playing a longer game, and the scoreboard should include more than one headline. Ross pointed toward streaming activity, catalog strength, physical products, ownership, and the fact that he was still releasing music after roughly 2 decades in the business. More importantly, he pushed an idea designed to challenge everything people were laughing about. Maybe massive opening numbers were not always the proof of organic demand that fans assumed they were. That was where his no bots argument entered the conversation. Ross suggested that dramatic first-week spikes, followed by major fall-offs, could raise questions about how genuine some numbers really were. That was his position, not proof that any particular artist was manipulating streams. But it gave him a way to transform criticism into a larger debate about what success actually looks like in the streaming era. Instead of accepting the label of a flop, Ross essentially told his audience to watch what happened over time. If the project continued accumulating streams without collapsing after the first week, he could argue that the music had real listeners behind it. But that defense came with a dangerous downside. Every time Ross talked about numbers, 50 Cent received another reason to talk about numbers too. And 50 did not need to prove that Ross had lost his entire career. He only needed to keep one question alive long enough for the internet to repeat it. If Rick Ross still considers himself one of hip-hop's biggest bosses, why did the album conversation become defensive so quickly? That question turned what should have been an album rollout into something much more personal. Because now Ross was no longer defending one project, he was defending what the word boss meant. In 2026, the beef stops being about music. Once album sales became the opening argument, It was almost inevitable that Rick Ross and 50 Cent would drag the conversation somewhere bigger. These two have never limited their rivalry to bars and records. Their public shots have repeatedly touched money, ownership, business decisions, contracts, brands, real estate, television, and the one subject that can instantly make a successful rapper uncomfortable: who actually owns what? Ross began attacking the idea that 50 could judge anybody else's business while raising questions about masters and old recording agreements. His message was designed to hit beneath the surface. Selling records is impressive, but owning the assets connected to those records can matter even more over time. That was also why Ross kept talking about his catalog. He wanted the audience thinking about 20 years of music, ownership, real estate, and investments instead of one album's opening position. But 50 Cent had his own powerful answer to that kind of argument. He had already expanded far beyond recording, building a reputation in television and film, while attaching his brand to projects that reached audiences outside traditional hip-hop. So suddenly the argument was no longer about which man had the hotter album. It became a competition over who had built the stronger empire after rap opened the first door. Ross mocked sneakers. He questioned film studio ambitions. He brought up money. He talked about ownership. And he even presented himself as somebody capable of sitting across a business table from the same rival he had spent years insulting. That contradiction actually made the feud more entertaining. They could clown each other in public 1 minute and speak like rival CEOs the next. And that is the real reason this beef refuses to disappear. Neither man is simply trying to prove that he can rap. Both are protecting a much larger identity. 50 wants to be seen as the strategist who turned music success into an entertainment machine. Ross wants to be seen as the boss who survived every era while keeping ownership, assets, and cultural relevance. At that point, the album was almost secondary. They were fighting over legacy, and when legacy becomes the prize, neither side wants the other man writing the final chapter. 50 Cent's most dangerous weapon is timing. Rick Ross can generate noise almost instantly. One live stream, one interview, quote, one joke about somebody's business, and social media has fresh material for hours. But 50 Cent has built a different kind of reputation in public rivalries. His advantage is not always speaking first. Sometimes it is waiting until somebody else creates the perfect opening. That difference matters. If Ross fires 10 shots in 10 directions, 50 does not necessarily need 10 responses. He can watch the conversation, identify the one moment that audiences are already reacting to, and amplify it until that single weakness becomes the entire story. That is why the reported performance of Set in Stone became so useful. 50 did not need a complicated argument. The internet was already debating the numbers. He simply attached his personality to the debate and made the criticism louder. The same pattern appeared when screenshots and online posts began circulating about concert seating. Instead of building an entirely new attack, 50 could use material people were already sharing. Whether those images provided complete context was a different question. Social media screenshots do not automatically reveal final attendance, ticket scans, timing, or the full business behind a show. But trolling rarely waits for a full audit. It runs on perception, and perception can move faster than facts. That is where 50 becomes especially difficult to fight. If Ross responds immediately, the story grows. If Ross ignores it, 50 can frame the silence however he wants. If Ross explains the numbers, the explanation becomes another clip. There is almost no clean exit once the cycle begins. Ross seemed determined to control the conversation through volume and confidence. 50 appeared more interested in controlling the moment. That made the rivalry feel less like two men simply insulting each other and more like two completely different communication strategies colliding in public. Ross wants to overwhelm the room. 50 wants to wait until the room is already looking in one direction and then point harder. And just when their old rivalry seemed large enough by itself, another superstar's name started pulling even more attention into the story. Drake. Drake turns the rivalry into a bigger war. Rick Ross already had enough pressure coming from 50 Cent, but his tension with Drake created an entirely different problem. Once Ross publicly criticized Drake's music and continued taking shots in his direction, every new comment involving either artist became something fans wanted to decode. That is how a two-man rivalry turned into a much larger internet battlefield. Ross had reportedly criticized Drake's Iceman, making it clear that he was not impressed. At the same time, Drake made comments during public appearances and live stream moments that fans quickly began analyzing for possible hidden shots. But this is where the story requires a line between evidence and interpretation. Not every Drake comment automatically becomes a Rick Ross diss, just because fans connect it to their history. Some connections are speculation, unless Drake directly identifies his target. Still, perception once again became powerful. Ross was now being discussed in multiple conversations at the same time. One side of the internet was arguing over his album performance. Another was watching his old feud with 50. Another was debating his relationship with Drake. Suddenly, every number, joke, and livestream could be connected to a bigger narrative about whether Ross had opened too many fronts at once. And that benefited 50 Cent. Without him having to do anything extra, the more names around Ross, the easier it became for critics to frame every setback as part of one giant story. But Ross had his own reason for staying aggressive. Attention is still attention. Every viral clip kept his name in circulation, while Set in Stone remained part of the conversation. That creates the central contradiction of modern rap promotion. Drama can make everybody talk about your album without making everybody listen to your album. A feud can dominate social media, while the music itself competes for attention underneath it. And that may be one of the biggest questions surrounding this entire situation. Did the controversy help Rick Ross promote Set in Stone? Or did the beef become so entertaining that the actual album turned into background music for the drama? Because while fans were arguing about Drake and 50 Cent, another visual started spreading online, and this time, the conversation moved from streams to empty seats. The empty seat war. Nothing travels faster during a celebrity feud than an embarrassing screenshot. When images and posts circulated online appearing to show unsold seats connected to Rick Ross performances, 50 Cent had exactly the type of material his trolling style thrives on. A seating chart filled with available sections can look devastating on social media, especially when people are already debating whether an artist's popularity has declined. Then came posts claiming to show a lightly attended venue, Verhältnis. The message practically wrote itself. First the album numbers, now the tickets. The narrative was becoming obvious to anyone who wanted to believe it. Rick Ross was losing momentum, but there was an important reality underneath the jokes. A screenshot taken before a show, a ticket map showing inventory, or a photograph from one moment inside a venue cannot automatically establish final attendance. Timing matters. Venue configuration matters. Promotional holds, resale inventory, and other details can completely change what one image actually represents. That did not stop the jokes. And in a rivalry like this, it probably never would. The purpose of trolling is rarely to present a complete financial report. It is to create a memorable image. People repeat. That is what made the situation dangerous for Ross. Numbers can be debated. Streaming equivalents require explanation. Business structures can get complicated, but a picture that appears to show empty seats is simple enough for millions of people to understand in 1 second. Ross therefore faced the same problem again. Ignore it. And the image speaks for him. Respond. And he gives the image another life cycle. This is how internet warfare changes celebrity rivalry. 20 years ago, two rappers might trade records or interviews. Today, a seat map can become a diss track without making a sound. But Ross was not going to accept 50's scoreboard. Instead, he returned to the category where he believed his position looked much stronger: assets, ownership, real estate, and the argument that one slow album cycle cannot erase everything he had already built. Ross changes the scoreboard. If Rick Ross could not control every conversation about Set in Stone, he could at least try to control what counted as winning. That is why his response repeatedly moved away from 1 week statistics and toward ownership, property, catalog value, and long-term business decisions. Ross wanted the public to look at the larger picture. He talked about real estate. He emphasized that he still owned his catalog. He discussed investments and presented himself as somebody thinking years ahead instead of living from one release date to the next. It was a smart defensive strategy because it forced critics to answer a different question. What exactly defines success for a veteran rapper? If an artist has already built hit records, businesses, property, and a catalog over 2 decades. Does one commercially modest album erase any of that? Of course not. But 50 Cent's trolling did not require that conclusion. He was not writing an academic assessment of Ross's career. He was attacking the current moment. That distinction explains why both men could sound right to their own supporters. 50's side could say, "We are talking about the album that just dropped. Look at the current numbers." Ross's side could answer, "You cannot reduce 20 years of success to one release." Both arguments use different clocks. 50 measures the present, Ross measures survival. And Ross seemed especially determined to make ownership part of that legacy conversation. In hip-hop, stories about artists signing bad contracts or losing control of valuable masters have been repeated for generations. So when Ross emphasized owning his catalog, he was not simply flexing money. He was placing himself inside a larger cultural conversation about control. That may explain why some of his sharpest attacks against 50 focused on contracts and masters instead of music. Ross was basically saying, "Don't show me how big you were. Show me what you kept." But 50 had another weapon waiting outside the financial argument. His history, G-Unit, Eminem, and now a surprising piece of unreleased Tupac material that immediately gave Ross another opportunity to troll him. G-Unit, Eminem, and the Tupac surprise. Just when the rivalry appeared trapped inside album sales and business arguments, 50 Cent mentioned something unexpected: new music involving himself. Eminem and previously unreleased Tupac material connected to a film project. That revelation instantly created another headline, and Rick Ross instantly saw another target. Ross mocked the idea, joked about Tupac having been gone for decades, and pushed 50 back toward the world of G-Unit nostalgia. He brought up Tony Yayo, Lloyd Banks, and the sneakers 50 was promoting, turning a potentially exciting music announcement into another comedy routine aimed at his longtime rival. That response showed how flexible their feud had become. Almost anything could be converted into ammunition. A record becomes ammunition. A shoe becomes ammunition. A television project becomes ammunition. A film studio becomes ammunition. Even the names of people who helped shape 50's career can be pulled back into the argument. Tony Yayo also became part of the surrounding conversation, publicly laughing at Ross while keeping the G-Unit side of the rivalry alive. And that gave the feud a strange generational quality. It was no longer simply two rappers exchanging insults. It carried echoes of old alliances, old crew identities, and old battles that younger fans may only know through clips. That history gives 50 a powerful advantage because his story is connected to one of the most commercially dominant rap movements of the 2000s. But Ross has his own history to defend. He built a distinct catalog, a recognizable persona, and a business identity that lasted long after many of his original era peers disappeared from the center of hip-hop. So once again, neither man could fully erase the other's resume. They could only attack the weak spots. And Ross was about to open another front entirely. This time, however, the conversation was no longer just jokes about sneakers and streams. He turned his attention toward former Cash Money rapper Briscoe and made allegations serious enough that they had to be treated very differently from ordinary rap trolling. Ross opens another front. Rick Ross's live stream involving Briscoe shifted the tone immediately. This was no longer just two wealthy rappers clowning each other over album numbers. Ross made serious accusations about Briscoe's alleged role in an old criminal case and repeatedly attacked his character. Those statements remain Ross's allegations unless supported by the relevant court records. And that distinction matters because accusations involving cooperation with law enforcement can carry enormous consequences inside hip-hop culture. But beneath the personal attack, Ross introduced a word that became the center of his message: accountability. He argued that people should take responsibility for decisions they made in the past. Then the live stream moved beyond Briscoe and into something much larger: Miami. Money, publishing, record contracts, and what younger artists should understand before signing their futures away. Ross reflected on his own early business experience and described taking a relatively small amount of money while giving up a significant share of publishing. Whether fans agreed with everything else he said, that part carried a lesson many artists have heard repeatedly. The first check can feel enormous when you have nothing, but ownership can become far more valuable years later. Ross then presented himself as operating differently today. His message to younger talent was essentially that he wanted artists to invest in themselves. I understand the business and build enough leverage to become bosses instead of permanent dependents. That was one of the most interesting turns in this entire saga, because behind all the trolling, Ross and 50 Cent actually represent versions of the same lesson. Both men use rap as an entry point into larger business opportunities. Both understood that fame alone does not guarantee long-term power. Both built identities around entrepreneurship. And both seem deeply invested in proving that their version of the journey was smarter. That is why their feud is bigger than personal dislike. It has become a competition between two philosophies of success. But after all the jokes, numbers, properties, contracts, and side battles, one question still remains. Who actually won this round? Numbers, legacy, and the price of attention. After all the screenshots, reported sales figures, live streams, and insults, declaring one permanent winner would miss the deeper story. 50 Cent appears strongest when the scoreboard is immediate. He understands how to identify an uncomfortable moment, simplify it, and turn it into entertainment. A sales number becomes a punchline. A seating screenshot becomes a narrative. An old quote becomes fresh ammunition. He does not need to destroy an opponent's entire career. He only needs to dominate the current conversation. Rick Ross plays a different game. His strongest defense is longevity. He can point toward years of records, business ventures, real estate, catalog ownership, and the simple fact that he is still relevant enough for people to argue about him decades after entering the industry. That is why one album cannot settle the argument. Current performance and career legacy are not the same measurement. A veteran artist can release a project that performs below his peak without suddenly losing every accomplishment that came before it. Music changes, consumption changes, audience age. New stars capture more attention. Comparing every veteran's current numbers to the hottest moment of his career can create a distorted picture. But Ross also faces a strategic lesson. When you constantly attack powerful rivals, you give those rivals permission to examine every weakness publicly. If you want the attention generated by conflict, you also inherit the consequences when the narrative turns against you. And 50 faces a lesson too. Winning an internet moment is not the same as erasing another man's legacy. Their rivalry may be entertaining, but neither man needs personal destruction to prove his success. Both have already built careers younger artists can study. The most valuable lesson is not how aggressively they insult each other. It is how they turn music into leverage, diversified their opportunities, and learned that ownership can matter long after the applause from one album fades. Competition can push people to improve, but there is more strength in building something permanent than spending every year trying to tear somebody else down. So now the final decision belongs to you. If you think 50 Cent controlled this round, come on. If you think Rick Ross's long-term legacy matters more than one album cycle, come on, dude. Tell us where you're watching from. Keep the debate respectful. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, like the video, share it with another hip-hop fan, and subscribe to the channel for the next chapter in rap's biggest stories.